Welcome back to Just the Convo, the podcast with open conversations for an open mind. My name is Jonathan Fors, and if you haven't already, please make sure to leave a review of the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever else you may be listening to this from. Because this will help me bring on even more interesting guests with even more interesting conversations to have. But that's all. Let's just get right into this week's episode. I hope you enjoy. Have you ever dreamed about achieving incredible feats such as climbing mountains, running ultramarathons, and really pushing your limits? Well, Lisa Tamati not only dreams about it, but she also acts on it. Having competed in the world's toughest endurance races in places such as the Sahara, Death Valley, and the Himalayas, she truly has got one of the toughest minds out there. She knows what it's like to overcome obstacles, chasing massive goals, and facing your fears. And today, of course, she's here to share it with all of you. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Super excited to be on your show. So thanks for having me.
Of course. And I've done my introduction, so I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Yeah, perfect. I have a background as what they call an ultra endurance athlete or ultra marathon athlete. So for 25 odd years, I've spent doing some of the toughest events in the planet. And the funny thing is, Jonathan, I have no talent whatsoever. As far as ability goes, things like what normally a runner would have, the right build, the right VO2 max, your ability to run really fast or anything like that, that didn't come naturally. But what I had was a really strong mindset and a really strong desire for adventure. And that was all you needed, apparently, and it was a career. I've retired now, but that saw me do some pretty really cool things. And I succeeded and I failed. I fell on my face a number of times. I've done over 70,000 kilometers in that time. I've raced over 2,000 Ks in the Sahara, so the Moroccan Sahara twice, the Arabian Desert, the Libyan, the Niger, Jordan, the Gobi Desert, Death Valley in the USA a couple of times, in Nepal and India, right through New Zealand at one stage. I ran 2,250 Ks for charity, that one was, in 42 days, which nearly killed me.
Oh, God.
And yeah, it was a tough one. And all this time, the thing is that I don't want to talk about running per se, because running is just putting one foot in front of the other, but it's the mental journey that you go on when you push yourself and when you step outside your comfort zone and when you scare the crap out of yourself, basically. In this journey that I've been on, I really learned a lot about what I'm actually capable of in life, despite maybe not having all the talent in the world. And that's helped me with what I do with coaching and writing books and documentaries and stuff. So yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell. I live in New Zealand, a place called New Zealand, right down on the other end of the world to you. So whereabouts are you sitting exactly, Jonathan?
I'm in Sweden, a city called Sundsvall.
Oh wow!
It's quite.
I cycled through Sweden. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
long
it.
time ago.
When was it?
It's amazing. Oh gosh, it was like back in my young years. Would have been 94.
Ah, okay.
94. Yeah.
Way before I was born.
Well, that shows you, eh? But that's yes. So I cycled through. I was in your country before you were in your country.
That's cool to know.
And loved it. A beautiful country, amazing people,
Thank you.
just incredible landscape. So yeah, not unlike New Zealand, really.
No. Yeah, well, right now I can't really agree, but landscape, there's snow, water, cold, and grey right now.
Yeah,
but
you're in the middle of winter. We're in summer, so we're lucky at the moment.
yeah. Well, one of the things that you touched on was that you had or have no talent whatsoever. And I'm a huge believer in that, because like talent is definitely not something that you need in order to achieve great things. But despite you saying that and knowing that, you still seek out these like insane events, these insane challenges. And what is it about it that like you enjoy?
Well, I think when I was younger, so I grew up in a family where being tough was cool. My dad was a really hard, tough, awesome dad. Don't get me wrong, but he was hard on us, and he wanted us to achieve, and he expected us to represent our country and in the sport. And sport was huge for him, and he wanted his kids, as lots of parents do, he wanted us to achieve, and so he pushed us quite hard as children. And I was a gymnast when I was a child, and that was a sport that again is very disciplined and can be, to be honest, quite brutal. And certainly I think having that sort of a background set me up for pushing the limits, if you like, and going sort of hard. And I really wanted, I had this burning desire. I had lots of problems with my self-esteem and confidence when I was young. And I was in this relationship back in my early 20s, actually the one I cycled through Sweden with. And he was a very, very talented athlete, a very extreme person. And the relationship, I mean, we were both very young, and, you know, there's no indictment on who he is today, but it was an abusive relationship, if you know what I mean. And it was very like, you know, you're useless, you can't do things, you're not good at stuff, and, you know, and a whole lot more. And so my self-esteem sort of was very low in my early 20s, and I didn't think that I was capable of very much. But we spent 5 years together, and we traveled all around the world, and we cycled through many, many countries and climbed mountains and trekked. But the relationship deteriorated and really got worse over time, and I sort of lost more and more of who I was. And it all sort of came to a head when we did a crossing of the Libyan Desert, as you do. And this was an expedition. It was actually 4 of us, and it was really out there. So we had to cover approximately 250 kilometers through a military barred zone, so highly illegal what we did. And it was on the sort of the border area between Libya and Egypt, so really a dangerous sort of, you know, area to be going around, and you weren't allowed to go through this area. But it is one of the most beautiful and most amazing deserts you can possibly imagine, and I've seen a lot of desert, and this was incredible. So 4 of us, this guy called Elvis, and that was his real name, from Yugoslavia, or the old Yugoslavia. He was a survival expert, and it was his dream to go through there, and he invited us to go along. And so we had to carry everything on our backs, so we had no outside support. So that meant backpacks between 35 kilos for me and 45 kilos for the guys, and 20 liters of water was all we had each. So because we physically couldn't really lift anymore. And that left us with only 2 liters of water a day, because we planned to get through in a maximum of 10 days. So we had to start off with 2 liters of water a day and see how we went. So this was an incredibly out there, and, to be quite honest, stupid thing to do. 2 liters of water a day in 40 degrees heat's just not a good combination.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you come up with the idea of, I'm going to do this thing?
Well, Elvis had been planning this for a long time, and he was friends with my partner, and he took us through the Arabian Desert, actually just a week before, and that wasn't so extreme, but this had been in his planning for a long time. And we didn't have like proper maps of the area because there were none, so he somehow got pilot maps from the US military. Don't ask me how, I don't know. and off we went. Basically, we planned. It was, you know, long planning and so on, but it was on the limit. So we had to cover 45 kilometers a day, pretty much, to get through in the time limit that we had. And 45 k's is a long way with, you know, 45 kilo backpacks in temperatures like this with 2 liters of water. So you start, if you know anything about trekking and tramping and deserts and stuff, you know, that's not a good combination. And I was very naive and very, you know, gung-ho, and so off I went, and this is the first desert. I mean, I've been through the Arabian the week before, but that was sort of a warm up. And like things like the blisters and stuff were just horrific. But what happened with this, my partner was he was a photographer, and we wanted to do a book about this journey because it's incredible scenery, and he wanted to take photos all the way through. And Elvis said, look, you can take photos, but you've got to keep up because we've got to keep moving. We've got to cover this. We can't be mucking around. And so these guys sort of ended up having a bit of a fight about this. And he said, well, you got to keep up. And so he wanted me to help him with the tripod and the camera equipment and keep up with him and help him with the photography. And I physically just couldn't do it. It was just impossible.
Oh, really?
I was like, I couldn't even get up off the ground with the backpack. It was so heavy because I only weighed like 59 kilos. And so this backpack was almost as big as me, so I was on the limit of what I could physically do just by moving forward. I couldn't go backwards and forwards and set up tripods and carry camera equipment and keep up with them. And so this ended up, and he, started abusing me and telling me I was useless and things. And the Elvis sort of like, hang on a minute, you can't treat her like that, So these two alpha males had a big fight, and this went on for a couple of days as we got more and more dehydrated, and the atmosphere got really icy despite the really heat, if that makes sense. And on day 4, he ended up, we had this big blow up, and he said, right, that's it, the relationship's over, and I'm leaving. You're on your own. Stay with those guys. I'm out. And like, we've been together for 5 years, and he left me in the middle of the Libyan desert in the deepest shit possible, and I'm extremely, to be fair, we're all extremely dehydrated and just in agony, so none of us, our tempers are pretty short. And so he basically disappeared over the sand dunes and left me there. And at that time, I was with the other two guys, and I was like, started to cry and started to break down. And then I'm like, I can't fall to pieces here. I've got 2 other guys that I'm responsible to, and I've got to get myself through, and I've got to learn to compartmentalize my emotions from having to take action. I can't just fall to bits here. So that was a really good lesson, because I had to, pull myself together and keep going, and I owed it to the other guys not to cause any more trouble, So I said to them, look, I'm good to go, and I was worried about him because I thought he'd, alone in the desert out there, he's very strong, capable, fit, and, better than us, but you just one twisted ankle away from dying out there. Right. And so it was pretty scary, So anyway, long story short, I got through that.
But yeah, I mean, that's obviously an insane scenario and place to find yourself. One thing I want to understand, though, is how do you find yourself in a situation like that? Because, like you said, your dad really pushed you as a child. At the time, did you understand and realize that this is actually setting me up for something better in the future? No. Like, you bumble through life, especially when you're younger, sort of just not knowing, it's easy from now. Like, I'm 52 now, and I can look back over my life and go, that's why I did something like that. And now I've worked through a whole lot of my issues. I can look back and I can start to see how things were. But when you're in the middle of it, no, you don't know where the heck this is leading or what you're doing. You're sort of making decisions on a day-to-day basis and trying to do the best that you can. And to get into a situation like this, I mean, just to finish that story quickly, so that we ended up getting really, really sick, and it was close to not making it out. My kidneys were severely damaged. I lost all the feelings in my upper body. On day 5, we had a massive sandstorm, and we had to sort of all hunker down, and we were walking a lot at night time, and between the real hot hours of the day, we were just hunkering down next to our backpacks, trying to get any sort of shade we could. But so it ended up on day 6, I think it was,
being severely dehydrated after the sandstorm that had hit us, because we'd not drunk our portion of water because we were so busy just hunkering down in our sleeping bags, just getting hammered by the sand and basically buried. We had to, in the 3 o'clock in the morning when the sandstorm stopped, we climbed out and we had to basically we were buried alive almost, and we got out and we just got walking. And on that day, Elvis he'd drank a lot. He'd taken his whole day's supply the night before. And I just hadn't had enough I'd been squirreling some of my way, even because I was worried that we weren't going to get through. And so he was sort of rejuvenated because he'd had his whole water supply for the day. And I was in, very bad shape. And then I started to have hallucinations and collapsing and just, I just keep falling down and passing out. And the guys would pick me up and put me on my feet and we'd carry on. And I was so out of it, I didn't know to ask for water even. I was just like a zombie just moving forward. And Elvis was just really pushing the pace because he was in better order, having had water, and I just passed out, and we still kept moving forward, and hallucinations like the rocks were like monsters chasing me and all this sort of stuff. And we finally got to this point that Elvis wanted to reach the Barbiti Depression, where we could see where we were because we were up on this like tabletop mountains, and then we knew where we were on the map. And then he backed off and he got me down this cliff, and then he said, right, get the water out of your bag and start drinking in the next few hours, because he knew where we were. He knew that we were going to make it out within 2 days. And he said, look, people die with 20 litres of water in their pack because they've pushed it too far so that their body can't come back. So that was a pretty, close call. And I mean, this whole thing took me 2 years to recover from. The relationship went south, and, I came out of that completely broken, and absolutely broken, on an emotional, relationship level and physically. And then I rebuilt my life, and that was a turning point in my life.
Yeah. What goes through your mind when you're in the desert like that and you feel like, yeah, like you said, you're hallucinating? What goes through your mind when you're at the point like that?
You have hardly any logical thought, Jonathan. You're just surviving. You have no glucose in your brain, so you've got nothing, and there's not enough water in your body. So your ability to think clearly, like we can now. I couldn't even speak. I couldn't articulate anything. Your tongue is so swollen from dehydration. So you're not thinking clearly, logically, anything like that. I remember on the actual last day as we were coming into this next oasis, when we knew that we were out and we had to get past this military base to get into the civilian part of the oasis and to get into safety. And, you're crawling along this under this fort with this guys in the tower with, machine guns, and there's just no emotion. Like, I should have been like terrified and stuff, but I just had nothing left in me. I was just moving forward was all I knew. And so it's only afterwards when you start to dissect these things and go, what the hell? Right. And then from there, I spent 2 years really recovering. But then I read about this race called the Marathon des Sables in Morocco. And this is a famous ultra marathon. And I loved the desert. I mean, apart from the experience, the deserts are beautiful. And I was reading about this race across the Moroccan desert, and I was like, hang on a minute, I reckon I could do that. And it was touted as the toughest race on earth. And I was like, hang on a minute, same distance, but you only have to carry 10 kilos on your back. You've got 9 litres of water a day. You've got doctors on hand. You've got, a whole big military base that basically moves with you every day. I reckon I can do this. So I hadn't even run a marathon at that point. I was not a runner per se. I mean, I'd obviously trekked and done a lot of stuff, but I didn't run more than the 5K run. But I signed up for this race, and I ended up doing that one, and it was life-changing. And at that point I was on my own, so I wanted to have a more safer environment, if you like, to do some adventure, but not completely off the deep end. And that was the beginning of my ultramarathon career, basically.
What is it about for you? What is the like actual reason that you seek out these adventures and challenges? Is it some weird fetish you got
I'm
going?
an adrenaline.
Yeah.
I'm an adrenaline junkie for sure. So I have, like, I do genetics, and so my genetic makeup is such that I have a higher amount of adrenaline in my body, and that makes me more of a risk taker. That makes me very action orientated. That makes me also sometimes quite hyper and agitated. And I need a lot of movements. So that's from the genetic point of view. From a experience point of view, I think wanting to prove myself in those early days that I was cool and tough and amazing and I could do things, and self-esteem and all of that. So when I did the one through Morocco, that Marathon des Sables, I was surrounded by amazing, positive people who told me I was great. And I really needed that at that time because I just had years of abuse. So I gravitated towards that, of course. So I wanted more of that,
Right.
you know, I needed, you know, and I was, you know, my early or mid-20s at this stage. And so I just did one race after the other. And then you started to realize, hang on a minute, I'm not too bad at this. If I train really, really hard and I work really hard. And I ended up, the longer the race, the better I did. And that was because I didn't have speed, but I could outrun most people because I like a track. I like to say I'm a tractor, not a Ferrari. You know, I can just grind along for a long period of time, and most people like stop before I'm still standing. So that was one talent that I had, I suppose, just the ability to just go super, super long. And once you start getting into the scene of ultramarathon running, as lots of ultramarathon runners will know, it just becomes addictive, and you're like, where's the next one? And then you do a race and it's horrific and it's terrible. And then you're saying to yourself on the finish line, I'm never doing another one again. And then the following week you're looking for the next hit. You know, it becomes very addictive.
Right. Do you think anyone could do an insane event like this? Because I'm a huge believer in that literally anyone can achieve anything if they actually work for it, of course. What I do also think is that a lot of people don't realize that, and a lot of people think that, oh no, that's just, I can't do that because that person is just better than me, and meanwhile that person has done it for 10 years already.
Absolutely, Jonathan. I'm 100% behind what you're saying there. So, I mean, you're an example. Like, you're doing a podcast, you're just making this happen. You know, you start somewhere and you just get it out there, and you just take steps and you do. And other people will think about it for 3 years before they'll do it. You know, and so with ultramarathoning, yes, anybody. I mean, you have to have a certain level of health, obviously, because you need to train. You need to do. And what I would say as a coach now. Don't do it like I did it. Do it in, you know, like, build yourself up to that level. Get a good coach, get good mentors, get the right information. But yes, anybody can do it. Not anybody can win it, but anybody can achieve it. And, you know, this is a sport where it isn't so much about the winning. The last person across the finish line is celebrated as much as the first, because everybody knows that person's done it 10 times harder than the guy who finished first. And so it's not so much, and it's a great leveler of the sexes as well, because it's quite often a woman that's standing at the top of the podium, or at least in the top, you know, 4 or 5, because women, it isn't about muscle size. It isn't about brute strength. It's more about mental strength, and it's about how much pain can you handle. It's about pacing yourself and not letting your ego take over too early and going too fast and blowing up. It's about, so women have a better ability on average to burn fat for fuel, and we have a little bit more fat on our bodies, generally speaking. And, you know, so there's a number of reasons why we seem to excel at this sport. And so, you know, and some of the big races, you know, even like Death Valley, which is sort of like the unofficial world champs of our sport, if you like, you know, women can be in the top 5, you know, if not at the very, very top of some of the races. So that's a really cool thing. So to answer your question, yes, if you have a burning dream and you don't think you have any talent and you don't have anybody backing you, I want you to listen to that little voice inside your head that says I can, and just start on the journey by taking that first step and find something. And we live in a day and age where I can literally go and find anything, study anything, get a mentor, listen to YouTube videos, listen to podcasts, teach myself anything, at any time. We're no longer limited because we live in a certain place or we don't have access to the right resources. We all have them. If you have a internet, at least in a phone, you've got access to the best teachers in the world. Right. And that is an incredible thing to have. People can jump on a podcast like this and learn about mindset and learn about what other people, and learn from others. So it's getting the right mentors, it's believing in yourself, and it's listening to that tiny wee quiet little voice that says I can, and not the screaming, I call it the snake, the big loud snake who's telling you, oh, but who do you think you are, and you can't do this, and you're not talented, and you can't, and if anybody ever says to me you can't do something, that's just oil on the fire for me to go harder. That's the way I see it. And that attitude has really helped me in life. And I'll give you an example of that shortly, because there are plenty of naysayers out there. Find the ones who tell you can, and this is the way, this is the next step you have to take. That's who you listen to. You don't listen to the rest.
For sure. And I'm actually a believer in not actually listening to the positive or the negative comments around you. Just listen to whatever it is that you're hearing in your own head. If it's positive, of course.
Yeah, but that is the problem, because most of us have this negative record going in our heads that we've picked up somewhere in that subconscious level. And sometimes you have to override that. So I agree, yes, you don't want to just say, anybody who tell you anything and sell you dreams that are not realistic. But finding that teacher, that mentor, that person who has done it, does know what they're talking about, has the experience to help you, and learn from them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
We need that support, I think, around us.
Yeah, and what you said about how anyone can do these things that you're doing, but not everyone can win it, that's also, to me, a very important point to make, that anyone can do a lot of things, but not everyone can be the best at it. But with that said, that doesn't have to be a problem, because if you do something, you enjoy it, and it's, you're enjoying it, then what's the problem with you not being the best? Why is that a problem? And I think that's for the most part where people get stuck. They think of, I want to do this thing that I've always wanted to do, but how am I gonna be the best in the world at it? And I'm like, I've always been like, well, so what if you enjoy it? Just exactly. Go for it.
Yeah.
And
I totally agree.
Yeah, I was gonna say how like me, for example, me doing this podcast, I enjoy it. I think it's so much fun speaking to all kinds of different individuals, but I'm definitely not the best in the world at it, and I know that. But
and you're good at it, and you're getting better at it, and that's all that counts.
Exactly. And the same thing, like, I'm very much into fitness too. That's one of the reasons that I was very intrigued by you. I love running. I love running so much. In the summers, at least, I run a lot of marathons just for my own, I guess, mental health. And I'm not the best runner. I'm not the fastest. I know I'm very fast compared to a lot of other people I know, and from the results I get in races. But I'm not the best at it, and I enjoy it. So that's the end of the story.
Exactly. We don't have, like I'm trying to teach myself to paint, because recently I lost my dear father, and he was a great artist. And when he was alive, I couldn't learn from him because he was so impatient with me. When he died, I decided I wanted to have that connection to him and start painting. I am hopeless.
Yeah.
But I go on YouTube and I start painting, and I've done, I don't know, 10 paintings, and I'm not very good, but I'm loving it, and I'm learning, and I'm getting better every time. And no master is born. You have to work to get there. And I don't put pressure on myself to be like my dad, because, that would overwhelm me. But all I can be is who I am, and trying to use that as a role model, if you like, and get closer to that. And every time I take a step forward, then I'm improving myself, and that's the way to go through life. Yeah, we don't have to, like, I bet you're a fast runner, but it isn't. It isn't for me. About standing in the top of the podium. On occasion when you do, that's just a bonus. That's awesome, and that's epic. But if you have that as your only goal, then you will inhibit yourself from even starting. When I listen to people who say, if I can't win it, I'm not doing it. Well, then you're never going to get any bloody where, because you're not going to win, for starters. Or very, very unusually, or if you do, you're not competing against very difficult people. So it's just not a good way to approach things, I don't think, because you have to be able to fight. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from ultramarathon running is resilience and persistence. And so when you get knocked down, when you fail, which I've failed on many occasions, by the way, and I analyze it, and I don't see that as me failing. I see it as I failed at something, but I'm not a failure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you tell me about any time you've failed? I think a lot of people would love to hear that.
Oh yeah, I've got some brilliant stories for you. There was a race that I did through a place called Niger, which is deep in the Sahara. It's one of the poorest, very dangerous country. And after doing years of this ultramarathoning, I thought, I'm going to have a crack at this race. And it was 333 kilometers nonstop through this part of the Sahara. And it was run by an ex-French Foreign Legion guy who really just took our money and didn't really care. It turns out when we got there, it wasn't like the other races that we'd been at that were totally super organized and, really good logistics and everything. This was a mess and chaos, and there was only 17 runners, not a couple of hundred or 300 or whatever. And the food that was meant to come from France with us didn't arrive, and so we were ended up having the local fare, which was a goat that was stuck on the Land Rover for 3 days as we drove out into the desert. And just to give you a bit of background, this was a very so at this point in my life, I was married, and I'd married another guy who was an ultramarathon runner. I was living in Austria, and the week before we went down to this race, he told me he wanted to divorce.
Oh.
And we've been preparing for this race for a year and a half. We were meant to be running it together. And he said, I want a divorce, and I'm not running that race with you. I'm doing it on my own because you're too slow. Oh. And this was a really dangerous race, like really, really dangerous. Like there was a civil war going on down there, this part of the place. The only people that ever came to this country were Red Cross workers, basically. So when we landed at the airport, it was just Red Cross people. There were upturned airplanes on the runway, lots of guys with machine guns, it was just a really holy shit, I'm crap here. And my heart was breaking because my husband had just told me he wanted a divorce, and I have to face this 330k run. And then we're driving out into the desert, and we've got bugger all food to eat. So, and I had relied on the guy because he said that all the food was coming and we would be able to have it at checkpoints along the way. So every 20 odd kilometers you have a checkpoint. And so we just didn't have very much food. We only had, cans of peas and goat and whatever we bought. Now my husband had bought every ounce of food because he wasn't relying on them, which was a good thing. He was right. He was better organized than I was. I ended up eating this goat curry the night before the event and got food poisoning.
Oh no.
Yeah, along with 5 of the other runners. So we started this race, and about an hour into the race, the food poisoning takes a hold, and you know, don't want to be too graphic, but both ends are going.
Right.
So you're vomiting and you've got diarrhea and stuff, and you're in the Sahara and you're on your own really quickly because there was only 17 of us. So you just spread really fast. And by that night, even like the first night, I started again just passing out because I was so dehydrated and like massive cramps. So you know what it's like when you get a food poisoning. You just want to crawl up and die in the corner of your bedroom, right? And you're running across the Sahara and there is no way out. And at one point, so I'd passed out, and another girl who was running from England, Eleanor, she came across me and she stayed with me. She was amazing. She managed to get me up, got my sleeping bag out, warmed me up because at nighttime the desert's freezing cold, got me back up onto my feet and helped me move forward. And then another guy came past us and he basically helped us get into this first checkpoint, which at this point was, I think, 35 Ks into it. And it was just checkpoint number one. I'm already passed out. And I get to the checkpoint and there's another couple of guys that are also in trouble with the same diarrhea. And there is a doctor, the one doctor that they had, and he gave us some pills, and basically I had a rest there for a few hours and then I carried on. So now, like I'm down to not much running. It's almost a walk, and still, you know, massive diarrhea and problems. And you're in this really, you know, so long story short, I carried on in this sort of state for 64 hours. So that's like just, you know, moving forward somehow and getting weaker and weaker. And it got to the point where, you know, I was bleeding and I was just unable. I had to pull out of that race at 222 kilometers. And for me, that was the first time I'd failed at a big race like this, and I was just in such a world of hurt because, you know, my marriage was breaking down. That meant the country that I was living with, and I had to leave. I would lose my business. I lost my house. I lost everything, and then I'd failed at this race on top of that, and I was sick. So that was probably pretty much as low point as the Arabian Desert, if not worse. And again, there was a changing point in my life. So yeah, that was one big, nice, spectacular failure for you.
Yeah, for sure. But how did you handle that afterwards? This huge failure must have been.
Yeah, it was. And it wasn't just the race, it was also the whole marriage and things. So I ended up coming back to New Zealand. I was 38 years old at this point, and I had to come back and move in with my mum and dad again. And I had nothing because I left everything to my husband, and I lost my business, and I had a very successful jewelry business, wholesaling and retailing operation in Austria. I lost everything. And I was back to square one at 38 years old, back in my country, which was the best thing that could have happened to me. And my parents picked up the pieces and they helped me get back on my feet. And I had a shop here, luckily, that my mother had already opened because we had a branch over here because I was a goldsmith. And so I slotted in there and I started to rebuild my life. And that made me a fighter, you know. So I've had to pull myself up from the gutter, basically, again. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur, for better or worse. I'm always doing something, learning something, trying something. So since that time, at that point, I ended up qualifying for this massive race that I'd wanted to do for over a decade called Death Valley. And my body was physically broken and I was burnt out and I was broke and I had nobody that I knew in my country because I'd been away for 13 years. But I just went and I signed up for it and I said, right, I've got to somehow come up with 50,000 New Zealand dollars to get to this race. So I started telling people about it and looking for sponsors and started just picking myself up. And I I came across these amazing people, sponsors along the way who said, yeah, I want a piece of that action. That sounds amazing. The toughest race, this is the toughest race on earth, it's called. And it's Death Valley, 217 kilometers, hottest desert on earth. And it sounds epic adventure. So people started to sponsor me and I ended up doing that race. And that was just amazing. I had a documentary crew come from 2020, and they did a documentary, and that changed my life because that gave me a name and some credibility. I got book contracts off the back of that, did a lot more documentaries, started racing again, got back on my feet, managed to eventually get, buy myself a house, a little one, and then work my way up from there. And since then I've run a number of companies and rebuilt my life. And then 5 years ago, so things were going okay and good, and I remarried my wonderful husband, who's a firefighter over here, and life's going along swimmingly. And then my mum, who has been my rock and always just amazing woman, has a massive aneurysm, which is a bleed in the brain. Okay. One morning we get that phone call, get up to the hospital, your mum's collapsed, and she was 74 years old. And so this launched me into a new world of hurt and a new world of fighting. We had a medical misadventure from the get-go. So my mum was, they left her there saying she's got a migraine, and she was having like massive headaches. She'd collapsed, etc. And I didn't know what to ask because I didn't know what was happening to her. And they left her there for 6 hours. And I had a friend who was a paramedic, and she came. I said, can you come up here? They're not listening to us. They're treating us like neurotic, old woman. And she came up and she said, oh my God, she's having a stroke or an aneurysm or something neurological is going on. And she went to the doctor and told him, like, get this woman a CT scan now. And she's a very forceful lady, and this guy relented. And after 6 hours, they took her in for a CT scan, and it came back, blood right throughout her brain. And then they were fighting for her life. And then it was, we had to, because we live in a little regional place, so we had to get an air ambulance down to our major hospital down in Wellington. And that took another 12 hours. So my mum is just hanging on by a thread, and they didn't think she was going to survive. And anyone who knows me just knows my mum's everything to me. And I was just like, after this medical misadventure, I was just like, I am going to take control. I am not leaving it up to these guys, good as they may be in certain areas. They're not perfect, they're human. And I'm going to learn, study, take control as best I can. And if they can save her at this critical point, then I'll, do everything in my power to get her back. And so she had an operation. She was in and out of coma. She was very close to dying so many times, but somehow, because of these great surgeons, they did things, and she pulled through that critical phase. And that was key. But when she, and on this whole time, I'm studying everything I possibly can. After 3 weeks, she comes out of this coma, but she has basically no higher function left. She's got no ability to speak, can't control any of her body. She had had a stroke on the operating table on top of the aneurysm, so she was paralyzed on the right-hand side. And that was slowly starting to come back, but it was massive damage there. No memory of who she is or what she is. She's like a baby, basically. And 2 months in hospital, and the doctors are going, there's massive brain damage. She's never going to do anything again. You have to put her into a institution and, to live out her days, and she probably won't live very long. And I just went, nah, that isn't happening. And I'm going to get her back or die trying. And I took every ounce of everything that I've ever learned about ultramarathoning and overcoming, and when people tell you can't, and I've put all that strength and energy into her rehabilitation and study. And so I came across things. For a start, in the hospital, I thought she had sleep apnea because I was seeing some of the things that I'd seen when I'd been at altitude, and that didn't have enough oxygen, and I was seeing these things in her. And so I said to the doctors, I want a sleep apnea assessment. And they said, no, you don't need it. Why would you do that for? And so I went against their rules. I got an outside consultant. I brought them in. They did a sleep assessment, and I was very unpopular at the hospital, but I didn't care. And it came back severe sleep apnea. And that meant she was stopping breathing like hundreds of times a night and knocking off what little brain cells she had left. And so that was a real win, because she would not have survived probably another 2 months if she hadn't had that sleep apnea machine put on her, which gives her gives her air at night. So that was my first win. And then I thought, what else can oxygen do? And I came across something called hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And now this is a really powerful therapy for many, many things: diabetic wounds, burns, gangrene. But they also use it in many countries for brain injuries, but not in New Zealand. So I couldn't get the ones that they had in our hospitals to take her on. And so I studied under Dr. Harch in America, who'd written a book on hyperbaric and brain injury. And I thought this is something that I can do that could really help my mum. So after 3 months, I fought like crazy to get my mum home and not be put in an institution. And everybody was saying to me, there's no way in hell that you are going to be able to cope. She's 24/7 care, 2 people around the clock. Your family will not cope with it. And I went to the social worker, and I had 2 books written at that point, and I threw them at him, and I said, this is who I am, and I'm taking my mum home, and you better get used to it. And he said to me as I walked out the door, you're going to be back in here in 2 weeks begging for our help because she won't be able to cope. And I said, we'll see, So I took my mum home, and it was really tough. It was really tough because we as a family had to, and everything stopped at that stage. I stopped running. I stopped doing everything. I just focused fully on her recovery. And then I approached a commercial dive company who had one of these hyperbaric oxygen chambers because they use them for dive accidents. And so I said to them, look, this is the research I've done. This is this is the situation. Can I use your chamber? And they're not set up for medical. They're not, that's not their thing. They're for dive accidents. But they said, yes, you sign a legal waiver, so they're protected, and yep, you can do it. So these incredible people let me do it. We did 33 sessions there with this extremely frail woman, if you can imagine. I'm putting them into this big chamber in a big factory, having to put her on a forklift because my mum can't move, and put her into this thing. Everyone almost thought I was absolute lala, but I was desperate. I did 33 treatments there, and then the chamber had to be taken off for a contract, and I lost access to it. But I could see that she was starting to respond. She was starting to have a little bit of a flicker of intelligence behind her eyes. She was trying to get a couple of words out. She was using her hands more. I just knew it was working. She wasn't getting up and being fine, but she was responding. And so then I mortgaged the house, and I bought a hyperbaric chamber, and I installed it in my house, which believe me was not an easy thing to do. And I started putting her through what's ended up so far. She's had about 250 sessions. And as she started to get little bits back, I started to study everything else: epigenetics, functional genomics, functional neurology, to put her on a keto diet, all of these things to help her brain function, supplements, nootropics, you name it. I'd studied it. And I stayed one step ahead of her in her recovery. And she started to come back more. And as she started to realize what had happened to her, and she started to have enough intelligence to understand what was going on with her, she started to fight with me, and she's a fighter. And she every single day, now we're 5 years into this journey, Jonathan, and she works 7 days a week. She is back to full health. She's lost 30 kilos. She goes to the gym 5 days a week. She has her full power of attorney over her life back because they took it off her. She has her full driver's license, full independence. And it's been the most incredible journey. So I've actually written a book about this one. That one's called Relentless, and it's the story of bringing her book back. And it's about, it's the mindset that you need when you are up against such a medical diagnosis, is that there is no hope. There is always hope when you're alive, and so that's my mum's story.
Yeah, for sure. That's an incredible story. I don't even know which part of it to dissect here, but listening to you speak, it's pretty big. Yeah, it's a big one. But listening to you speaking, it seems like you're one thing that we touched on before the story about your mum was how you seem to be in it for the progress, not for the result, the final result. And continuing on that, even in the story about your mum, I can see that same thing in you that you're not for the final result, you're just in it for the progress, because you can see a little bit of
Little bit of progress.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is that true?
yeah, totally. That's so good. So you have in your mind, like I always had in my mind, my healthy mum back. Yeah, that was my end goal. But there are a billion steps between here and there, and we're talking thousands and thousands of hours of retraining the brain. I had to teach her everything, like how to find her mouth to put food in it, how to sit, how to just every aspect that you would teach like a toddler. It took me 18 months to teach her to roll over in bed, like to roll onto her side, stuff that we just take for granted.
Of course.
And you would have, and this is where being an ultramarathon runner really helped, because I knew how to just keep going no matter how slow the progress, you're moving forward. And that's day in, day out, day in, relentless. And I know that discipline of the daily grind, because I'm an athlete that has to train every day, basically. And so I know that, you don't see big wins. You don't suddenly start running and getting really, really good in 5 minutes. It takes years of building the body up and training it and improving it and so on. And so this constant progression is a natural thing that you're used to. That's how it is in life. And if you want to, so you have the big goal, but then you look at the next step and the next step and the next 5 steps maybe, and you keep your focus in. And when it gets tough, and believe me, it got tough. And there were times when I was just absolutely exhausted. It really blew my health to pieces, because I burnt myself out, because I was still running my companies and still trying to, do all this on the side. And mum was, all day. So I would have to work all night. And, like there were just times that I just blew myself completely apart. But I had to. And now I'm lucky my mum is back to normal and I can go back to a pretty normal life. But it's been tough. It's been tough.
Do you think people are missing? Because in my experience, the people my age, and for reference, I'm 21 years old. People.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is young.
Yeah. Well, people in my age, in my experience, they seem to be lacking the patience and I guess the endurance, the mental endurance of achieving certain goals. And it can be about like your career, your education, your personal goals, fitness goals, whatever kind of goals. In my experience, people tend to miss the endurance and they just want the final result, but they want it now without the work.
Yeah, and there are always exceptions to the rule, but I think as a generational thing, because we've had so much instant technology and everything is instant. If you want to find something, you Google it, you find out immediately, right? If you want something, you order it online and it's delivered to you. Everything is geared towards that instantaneous satisfaction and gratification. And I do think that this is a problem, and it's not of your making or not of your generation's making, it's of our generation's making. But you're living with the consequences, which is unfortunate. So I think you can teach yourself resilience though by putting goals that are quite big in front of yourself, and then developing tiny little habits that you build on all the time, so that because what worries me with young people is if something comes at them, like my mum situation, and it knocks them over, then they're down and they're out, because they don't have that resilience to stand back up again and that grit and determination. So I think it's really important that you develop that. So like, for example, you running your marathons, that's hard, that's tough, that requires discipline, that requires commitment. And that is teaching. It's not really about the running, it's teaching you those skills for your other parts of your life. And that's what I think if young people, and it doesn't have to be running, but it can be anything that you've, taking up an instrument or doing a degree or something that's tough and you have to really fight for, teaches you to overcome and be resilient and persistent. And so then when life comes at you with a curveball, which, believe me, guys, it's coming at you sooner or later, because that's what life does, then you're not going to be completely broken at the first hurdle. and you'll be able to get back up again and fight again. And I think that's a super important thing to culture and develop. And hey, at 21, I didn't have that probably either, so it is something you develop. It's just like every other skill, you develop it over time with that, resilience. I remember what was I, 18 or something, breaking up with my first boyfriend back in that day and thinking that the world was ending and wanting to commit suicide, because you are emotional, you're very, driven by hormones at that age. You don't have a viewpoint for the rest of your life. You only have the pain that you're in now. And I didn't have the skill sets to be able to cope with it. Then luckily I, made it through that time and now have a whole lot of skills to be able to cope with different things at life. And I've lost 2 babies. I've lost, had that happen to my mum. I recently lost my dad. I've lost, my businesses. I've been through the ringer.
Right.
And
yeah, you've truly been through it all. And
yeah.
Just a quick note: we've passed an hour. Do you have time?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we do. I probably have to actually get Mum to training, so we probably will wrap it up. But I hope your listeners have gained something from this, and I want to thank you for doing the show. I think it's important. It doesn't matter how we just need to start and do these things and get it out there. And I'd love if anyone's listening to come and check out what I do, because I am a running coach. That's one of my day jobs. So we have an online run training system that we do all online. So we train athletes, 700 athletes all around the world. I have 3 books: Running Hot, Running to Extremes, and Relentless, which are all available. Relentless is on Amazon and all those places. The older books are available on my website. And we also do gene testing and epigenetic testing, which is a specific thing so health optimization and stuff. So I'd love everybody to come and check that out at lisatamati.com. So TAMATI.com. And I also have a podcast, Jonathan, if you don't mind giving me a plug for my podcast. It's called Pushing the Limits. And you can find that on all the good podcast apps and stuff, or iTunes and all that. Or again at the website, lisatamati.com.
That's perfect. And I have to say a huge thank you for taking the time to want to speak with me.
Oh, it's wonderful to connect with someone in Sweden who's 21, and I'm in New Zealand and I'm 52, and isn't that cool? Through technology we found each other and we've had this brilliant conversation. So Jonathan, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor for us.